Test. Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Let's see. Looks like my audio is working. Yeah. All right. Perfect. Yes. Hello. And welcome to Thursday's class, which is taking place on a really lovely day. Yeah. I just had the dog at the park. And yeah, it's nice and warm. It's a nice change. So today I want to finish up the chapter on technological determinism. So let's, okay. Let's share my screen. Well, first let's let person in. Let's share the screen. No, share the whole screen. That's what I usually do. Okay. So we've got the rest of this chapter, which I found a bit long. But the one following this one, which is the one that received the most votes in our Discord poll, is quite short. And that, of course, is autonomous technology, which is kind of related to what we were talking about last time when we defined technological determinism. So, of course, we saw that technological determinism and autonomous technology are interrelated, but one need not entail the other, right? Or one does not necessarily entail the other one. We also talked a bit about Marx. Oh, excuse me. I think it would be helpful to recall just briefly the Marxian theory of technological determinism that we discussed, which is that Marx sort of thought of the political and economic system as, a base. So you have your political or economic base or foundation, and then the superstructure built on top of it, like a building, right? The economic base includes things like resources, sources of labor. And when it shifts, when the economic base shifts faster than the superstructure can, and the superstructure are like, the codified relations of the base, the societal stuff, then that's when you have social upheaval, like a French Revolution sort of situation, right? So it's deterministic in the sense that changes in the base or foundation cause social upheaval. That's the sense in which this is deterministic for Marx. But we're going to encounter later on today a slightly different take on this, where maybe culture determines technology, right? And would that be just a different kind of determinism? Oh, I don't know. Would that be any better than technological determinism, or would it be just as bad? I don't know. Maybe we'll discuss that. But we'll pick it up with Marshall McLuhan, a Canadian philosopher, in fact. Here he is here with his books and cigarettes and telephones. He laid down a lot of the foundations of like media studies and communications theory. And you may have seen that Heritage Minute of him if you grew up watching Canadian television, which of course has the fellow playing Marshall McLuhan coming up with his famous dictum, the medium is the message, right? So here's Marshall McLuhan. Marshall McLuhan talked a lot about media and the information age. You've definitely heard this term before. We're not in the industrial age anymore, at least not in countries like Canada. We are, in fact, in the information age, the the second or third or fourth industrial revolution, I guess, depending on who you ask. I'm actually not really sure which sort of revolution we typically refer to the information revolution with, which term that is. But anyway, technocrats and sociologists of science and technology, science studies people, so on and so forth, they emphasize that in the information age, it's information, not energy or resources, right? That gets emphasized in determinism. So it's information that plays the dominant role in determining culture. So obviously the technology we're talking about here is like information technology. So we're talking phones, we're talking computers, we're talking televisions, we're talking smartphones, right? To distinguish them from the earlier telephones, like those that are on the wall here. So Duzic writes here, Marshall McLuhan, whose famous slogan is "The medium is the message," developed a theory of communication media and their effect on human consciousness and culture. And his ideas, I think, are quite important for understanding theories of technological determinism in the age that we are in now, the age of information. He may not be exactly right about all of his conclusions. There's some debate about whether, for example, what McLuhan says about the television is correct. McLuhan was quite optimistic about television. Others are like Adorno, as we'll see later on, are a little more critical of media like television. But we'll get to that in a moment. Okay, so let's change the slides. So Duzic also sort of points out here that, excuse me, in a certain sense, McLuhan's work is similar to Marx's work. Both imagine these sort of sequential themes in human history. For Marx, that's a result of history unfolding because of class struggle and stuff like that, right? And we start out for Marx in a sort of primitive communism. Then eventually society gives way to capitalism. So primitive communism, we're talking like Garden of Eden sort of lifestyle, right? Small communities, hunter-gatherers, everybody's sharing. Then capitalism in some form or another. And then an eventual return to communism. Marx, well, a lot of his followers thought that this would have to be done via revolution, the Bolsheviks, for example. McLuhan has a similar number of themes. He thinks that we first emerge from a nice, happy oral culture, right? Eventually, we enter print culture, and we become alienated for reasons that we will discuss. And then we return to a happy communal culture thanks to the television. So what are the differences? Not necessarily the differences between Marx's and McLuhan's themes in human history, but what are the differences between McLuhan's own different themes? The alienation, how is that in print culture different from oral culture? How is this different from communal culture around the television set? Let's talk about that. There are some interesting reasons that Duzic outlines in the book. And you may draw from those if you wish, or you may offer your own thoughts. But let's start with the oral culture. Why is oral culture happy, say primitive yet nice, good for us, right? Nobody's alienated. Let's talk about that. Anybody want to take a crack at it? Lots of people are still arriving. No, eh? Okay. Well, Think about an oral culture. Not only does, predominantly nobody write or read, because there is no reading and writing. There's in oral cultures, there's often no alphabet, no written language, right? So stories are stories, myths, information about the world are all passed down communally, right? Imagine this. Imagine it. You're sitting around the fire, and somebody who's older and wiser than you is telling you and everyone else, a story of importance, a story about where you come from, or a story that's designed to teach you something about the world you live in, right? That's communal. Think of, if anyone's familiar with, I like to use the ancient Greeks as an example, right? Excuse me. Think of a bard reciting Homer, right? Homer, now you can read Homer and it says, something like over on my shelf there, the Iliad by Homer. But of course, Homer didn't come up with the story. He just wrote it down, right? Or maybe he didn't. Maybe multiple people wrote it down and it was just attributed to him, right? We're not quite sure. But in any case, back in the day, that story was being told for many, many, many years before it was ever written down. People would memorize it. I mean, let me show you. Let me show you. So, I mean, this is a thick book. And it's not like the text is large. In an oral culture like the ancient Greeks pre-written Homer, this would have been memorized, right? This would have been memorized by your bard, by your rhapsode, right? And they would get together and even kind of like see who could outcompete the other bards, right? This is actually a really metal version, a really metal translation of the Iliad. It begins, rage, sing goddess, Achilles' rage, black and murderous, that cost the Greeks incalculable pain, pitched countless souls of heroes into Hades' dark, and left their bodies to rot as feasts for dogs and birds, as Zeus's will was done. Begin with the clash between Agamemnon, the Greek warlord, and godlike Achilles. So that was just one little bit. But back in the day, imagine that. That would have been so cool. A couple, 3 or more people around a fire, almost like a rap battle, seeing who can out-orate the other. Amazing. I love to imagine that sometimes. I think that would be really cool. So everybody's getting together. You can see how that's very communal, and nobody really owns the story, right? It's for everyone. But then we get to print culture. What happens? Anyone? No, huh? Well, that's okay. Print culture is alienating because we do it alone, right? Whether we're reading or writing, it's lonelier. Here's something in the chat. Yeah. That exactly. Before the invention of the printing press, books were handwritten, so they were a lot more expensive. Before the printing press, very few people owned copies of the Bible, for example, and the Bible was in, at least in Western Europe, it was only in Latin. So then when the printing press was invented, the Bible could be printed instead of handwritten. And later on, Martin Luther would utilize this technology to translate the Bible into German and get copies out there. This actually goes against the point that I think McLuhan is trying to make. Before the printing press, yes, writing was very alienating in the sense that not many people had access to it. But at the same time, those that didn't have access to written literature were still kind of living in an oral culture, if you think about it. Even going to church, right? If you were a Christian in the Dark Ages, you probably weren't reading and writing, but you'd go to church and you'd hear the priest saying the prayers, reciting everything. But then, of course, I mean, the priest is doing that in Latin, and you probably don't speak Latin because maybe you're a peasant. You only speak, Old English or something. I don't know. Depends where you are. Well, I guess if you're in the UK, oh no, Henry VIII doesn't happen for a while. So yeah. Anyway, so another way that written language is alienating is that if I'm sitting in a group and there's somebody reading the Iliad to me, I'm enjoying it with everyone else. It's almost like being at a concert and everyone enjoying the same musical performance, right? In fact, to the Greeks, this is musike too. Musike, music, anything to do with the muses. And that's why, in the beginning, when the poet says, rage, sing goddess, Achilles rage. What goddess is he talking about? He's talking about one of the muses, he's trying to invoke the muses. So this was music to the ancient Greeks too. But anyway, we are, we're sitting around the fire, we're enjoying it as a community. But if I'm reading this at home by myself, it's not the same, right? I'm alone. And now there's a name. Now there's a name on it. It's somebody's story. Someone owns it. The author. This is the author's story now. So that's why print culture is a little alienating. Let's see if we can move on here. How are we doing for time? Why are people texting me? Okay. So McLuhan's ideas aren't completely unique. Duzic says as much here. He says, quote, Duzic's McLuhan's account is not unique. A number of scholars in history, the classics, and rhetoric developed the contrast between oral and literate culture. Writers in communications theory and in classics had developed similar ideas, but without the grandiose sweep and popularization of McLuhan. McLuhan extended the series of contrasts of communication media to include 20th century television. Interesting. So here, I put this picture here for a reason. I sort of grew up, I think end of the Cold War, before the internet. This was very much something I grew up with, coming home after school. The Simpsons were in syndication on the CBC, and of course in the introduction, they all come and sit down on the couch to watch television. So this was an experience that I was having reflected in the show I was watching, and I think this really captures the way in which technology like television is McLuhan sees as not alienating, but as community building. All right, here's the nuclear family gathered around the couch watching the television together, right? So electronic media, like not just the television, but also the radio, change human culture. And they change it significantly. McLuhan called the radio, actually, just to talk about the radio for a moment, he called it a hot medium, or an emotional medium. That's because in contrast to print, radio allows the audience to experience the voice and the emotion of the speaker. Oh, excuse me. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I keep yawning. And initially he was criticized for this. People would say, what are you talking about? Marshall McLuhan, the radio is not hot or emotional. But with the rise of, I think, right-wing talk radio, I think is probably the best example you could find of radio as a hot or emotional medium compared to print. What's a good example? Anybody know? I know that very few of you probably listen to the radio. But can we think of any examples of such a hot personality?
Rush Limbaugh before he died.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Rush Limbaugh is probably the number one reason why that kind of radio took off. It's not that he was the first one to do it, but yeah, Rush Limbaugh, absolutely. There is, in fact, a really good documentary. It's a podcast documentary done by the CBC called The Flamethrowers. Flamethrowers, a reference to these old, like, gigantic radio towers that had like crazy high voltage so they could broadcast really far. And this is how like AM radio, AM talk radio took off, which quite early on was seized by the right wing as a means of kind of, you know, propagating misinformation. This is not new. Like misinformation, right wing punditry is so not new. It's been going on since right after the Second World War, arguably. But you can listen to this history, and it's very, very interesting. It kind of gives you a nice overview of how this sphere of radio developed. Nowadays, we don't really have the radio so much, but we have radio-like things. Who might be maybe a modern day equivalent of somebody like a Rush Limbaugh, who's not necessarily on the radio, but who does something similar? There's many examples to draw from. Let's see. Rogan, I think, is arguably, you could make that argument certainly with Joe Rogan. I mean, think about how Joe Rogan kind of does his thing. And I'll say right off the bat, like I was never really a listener to Joe Rogan, because I'm sorry if there are any fans, but I've never, like, whenever I hear a clip or something, unless it's about what he knows, which is like MMA, fitness, unless it's about something he knows, I just don't think he sounds that smart. And you know, when I've listened, like if a friend has shown me something like, check this out, I don't feel like I've learned anything, right? So I don't really mess with Joe Rogan's podcast. But from what I have seen, when he kind of goes outside of his area of expertise and starts talking about, like, you know, COVID-19, he is absolutely all emotion and fallacy. And he's not like angry like a Rush Limbaugh, but he's still kind of emotional, right? Still kind of emotional in the way that he delivers. Well, good, Max. You have good friends. Yeah, you have good acquaintances. I mean, it's something I see on the internet. Oh, of course. Well, Joe Rogan's actually quite short, isn't he? I don't know. You might have a reach advantage if you're talking about physical combat. But yeah, Joe Rogan's shorter than I always thought he was taller. He's like 5'7". I don't know. It's just weird. I don't know. I imagine famous people as being taller than they are. That's like a cognitive 5'2". Oh, wow. What? That's crazy. That means I've got like a foot on him. Wow. But yeah, Joe Rogan. There's more examples, more like anger, more emotion. Who can we think of? Yeah, Trump is a good example. Trump when he was on Twitter, but Twitter is a written medium. Alex Jones was the one I was looking for. Yeah, and Russell Brand is not bad either. I'm familiar with Alex Jones. Oh, John Oliver is a good example. Nice, an example from the other side of the spectrum. That's great. Yeah. Let's not pick on the right wing. Let's focus on everyone. So yeah, Alex Jones is absolutely probably one of the most emotionally charged people in this medium, right? That's fair enough. I quite like John Oliver. I don't really watch Trevor Noah as much, but yeah, I like John Oliver. But he is emotional. So maybe television, we haven't really talked about television yet, but television maybe isn't as cool a medium as McLuhan suggests. But Alex Jones for sure. Alex Jones, if you're not sure, kind of started out in this sort of fringe conservative talk radio kind of thing and has just blown up. I still think it's nuts how he is mainstream. Like people know who he is now, which is thanks in part to his friend Joe Rogan. But he advocates all kinds of crazy conspiracy theories, all kinds of nuttiness. And I hear Russell Brand is going down that path too. I mean, Russell Brand, all of these folks have this sort of provocative, like I'm just asking questions sort of mentality. When I think they all know what they're doing is not just asking questions, right? They are actually sowing doubt and spreading misinformation. And I think they know that. They're bad faith actors. Tucker Carlson for sure. Tucker Carlson is very much like just a right-wing radio host on television. That's the impression that I get. I try not to watch Tucker Carlson, but maybe sometimes if I'm watching John Oliver, I'll see a clip of some of these guys, right? But yeah, not everyone's cup of tea. That's fine. There are others. We'd probably be beating a horse. Brian Stelter. I don't know who. I don't watch a lot of American. Oh, okay. Yeah, so anybody who's kind of punditry, Don Lemon, yeah, maybe a bit. If we're talking about the left wing, kind of like emotionally charged. Yeah. Oh, Rachel Maddow for sure. Yeah, like same kind of thing, punditry, right? If it's more about emotions, than delivering the facts. I mean, hey, Mr. Facts don't care about your feelings, right? Mr. Ben Shapiro over there, who says he's all about facts and logic and destroying people with them, is absolutely one of the most emotional people on the internet. So, I would say he's in there too. So, okay, but now this discussion is interesting because a lot of these people are on television or the internet, right? So McLuhan thought that television was a cool medium because it brings in visual context and experience. It makes us more primitive. It brings us together into what he called the global village, right? Thus, The Simpsons. I mentioned this now, and I think when the Simpsons started to get bad as a satirical show, when it started to kind of lose its edge, was around the turn of the century, which is when the internet was kind of really becoming mainstream. But I still remember it was weird to sort of to grow up with this, and now to go back and watch an older episode of The Simpsons. You should do it. Watch some old episodes of The Simpsons, like seasons 1 to 9, before the internet was a thing, before before these characters had cell phones, before their TV was a weird flat screen TV like it is now in season 35 or whatever it is. Yeah, it's a different show about a different time, and it's a really interesting study in, you know, the sort of nuclear family in the age of television. And also it was funny. Now it's not as funny. But back in the 90s, like The Simpsons was like legit the best satire on television. I'm just saying. So not everyone agrees with this, right? And we've just seen, you know, maybe television doesn't bring us into a global village. Nowadays, when you have your I can't pronounce his name. When you have your Tucker Carlsons and your Alex Joneses, or your Joe Rogans, or your Rachel Maddows, everything is so polarized and so divided. And as I mentioned a moment ago, you know, when I look at a clip of like Tucker Carlson, it's like just, you know, the guy from the radio on television. It's not like a news program, you know. Oh, Steven Crowder's the worst. Oh my God, I can't stand that guy. He looks like fucking what's his face from the Uncharted games. He dresses like Nathan Drake. Like he's sitting in his thing with his cigar, with his little scarf, with a gun in your pod. Like, oh my God, like I'm trying not to curse. Like Steven Crowder, what a knob. It's insane, and he's not an intelligent person. Is the other thing. Like he's 100% propagandistic ideologue dressed up as a video game character. Oh, he's the worst. So, you know, but that's interesting, because think about that. Like, so many people know who he is because of his stupid shtick, you know, going to college campuses and you know, like oh, guns are good. Change my mind, bro. You know, like, yeah, it's a simple formula. He is a sophist, and he's not even a good one. I don't think many. I mean, I don't want. Look, I know I'm picking on a lot of right wingers here, and if you don't like somebody like Rachel Maddow or John Oliver, fair enough. But the right wing really does have a problem with you know, lies and misinformation. There's some of that everywhere you go, of course. Yeah, you can't forget about Jordan Peterson. But again, Jordan Peterson is really, a lot of these people are like past television. A lot of these folks came to prominence because of the internet, right? And we haven't gotten to the internet yet. But absolutely, I think Peterson is this kind of, I get the same feeling from Peterson when I listen to Peterson speak that I get from Rogan. I don't feel like anything smart is actually being said. It's just that Peterson uses more complicated language, more verbosity, you know. But Peterson is just, I don't know. He's, yeah. The striking thing about Peterson is how much he's been wrong about, and how much people are willing to forget that. Like, he rose to prominence because of a viral video clip. I mean, he was a well-known academic before this. He had written some influential papers on addiction, and he had written Maps of Meaning, which, I'm sorry, I know he's a critic of postmodernism, but Maps of Meaning is all over the place, weird, just as cryptic as any postmodern text. But he came to prominence because of a viral video protesting the updates to the Ontario Human Rights Code to cover gender gender terms, right? Like, to make sure people use the correct pronouns and stuff. or really more importantly, to stop hate crimes from happening. In the meantime, Peterson thinks he's going to get fired for accidentally misgendering somebody or something. Like it's nuts. And then what does he end up doing? He ends up rage quitting the University of Toronto anyway, some years later. And he was also completely wrong about what the law in question would actually have done, right? It wouldn't have allowed people to fine Peterson for accidentally misgendering somebody, although I think he's also not talking about it in the sense of it being accidental, but he's like, oh, what if I don't believe there's more than two genders or whatever? He's kind of a transphobe that way. But what was I saying? Yeah, like, and I get that, yeah, Stefan, because he just sounds so angry about everything. Like, he sounds angry when he discusses things. Like, it's not passion, it's anger that I hear when I listen to him talk. And I don't know what he's got to be so angry about. I really don't. Good job, lots of money, a following. What is he angry about? But anyway, he was completely wrong about what that bill would do. So anyway, but that's all internet stuff. Let's get back to television. What time do we have? 12:12. So we're doing good discussion. Let's close it. I'm distracting myself with my phone. Some of the German critics of media disagree with what McLuhan has to say about television, making us happier, more primitive, coming back together, the global village. Like, here's a little tribe, as it were, a little family, but everybody's doing this around the world, around the television, living like we did, back in the day when we were hunter-gatherers. We're back in the global village. Everyone's doing this. So that's why it's the global village. But Duzick reminds us, quote, some German theorists of media, such as critical theorists like Adorno and Horkheimer, exposed to Hitler's dictatorship and propaganda, followed by exile in Hollywood, were less favorable than McLuhan to the electronic media. They went as far as to claim a resemblance between fascism and 20th century mass media, such as cartoons and television. Hitler, significantly, was the first politician to make highly successful use of the radio and the first political campaigner to make use of the airplane. They're absolutely right about this. Back in the day, in the Third Reich, the state provided you with a radio. Every household had a radio, which on the face of it sounds like, wow, that's super democratic. A radio? There, of course, was only one channel that you could tune in to listen to. And that was the state radio channel, right? Which was all Joseph Goebbels propaganda, right? And this is something that's going on prior to what I was talking about in the Americas before the sort of hate radio thing, right? Yeah. I mean, Russia Today, I think, just to sort of relate it to current events, Russia Today was just banned by the CRTC from Canada. We've removed it from all platforms because it's just propaganda, like it's Kremlin controlled. And another network, I think they have two. I think they only have two news networks over there, and they're both state controlled. There's Russia Today and there's Sputnik. And it's of course television, radio, internet, all of that. But in the Third Reich, it was radio, and you'd tune in and you were supposed to listen to the propaganda. You were supposed to listen to the speeches from the Fuhrer, right? And the first political campaigner to make use of the airplane I mean, it's interesting that he calls him a campaigner, because some of the more famous images of Hitler using an airplane, I think, come from when he was already in power. I'm talking about Leni Riefenstahl's film. It's called Triumph of the Will. It's a propaganda film that sort of documents Hitler during his Nuremberg rallies, right? And of course, the film opens with Hitler on the airplane coming down out of the sky in the airplane, you know, like a god coming to Earth, right? This is very intentional. It's part of the propaganda. So he's not just going around, you know, trying to win votes with an airplane. I mean, when you read about how the Nazis came to power, that's not what went down. But he did make use of the airplane for propaganda reasons, right? And Leni Riefenstahl puts that excuse me, in her film. You can probably see clips of the scenes that I'm talking about. And this is a film that, even though this is Nazi propaganda, this is a film that has influenced a lot of, you know, big filmmakers. That's how, you know, like that's propaganda for you, right? Some of the very same I guess shots, ways of filming things, ways of portraying people that we get in big blockbuster movies today first appeared in propaganda films like this. So that's interesting to think about. All right, let's move on. Oh, my slow computer. Nah. There we go. Ah. Oh my goodness. Okay. Right slide. Here we go. So sort of skepticism about the benefits of television. You know, skepticism of McLuhan's idea that television makes us more primitive and happy and brings us back into this sort of village mindset, this primitive village in the global village. Skepticism and the opposite view that we just encountered receives support from people like, you know, Bagdigian, who points out that in radio and television now there are quite a lot of monopolies, right? I mean, if I does the name Rupert Murdoch mean anything to anybody, right? Fox News, Sky News, yeah. Conrad Black owned a whole bunch of newspapers. Now Post Media owns so many Canadian newspapers. I mean, it's a monopoly of information. And this is not a good thing. Why? Well, Duzic writes, the centralization of television can allow a kind of mass brainwashing by propaganda. Adorno, in his How to Watch Television, called television reverse psychoanalysis. That's very interesting. Rather than making us consciously aware of our primal urges and neuroses, as psychoanalysis is supposed to do, television makes us become unconscious and infantile. In Bart Simpson's immortal words, it's hard not to listen to TV. It's spent so much more time raising us than you have. And of course, he's talking to Marge and Homer, his parents. So yeah, psychoanalysis is supposed to make you aware of those things that are in the unconscious driving your behavior. Television does, oh, excuse me, television does the opposite to that. Oh, I've got the hiccups now. Yeah, television does the opposite. So yeah, McLuhan and Adorno seem to disagree on some things and agree on other things. I don't think they necessarily disagree about what television does. I think they disagree on whether it's good or bad. McLuhan thinks that television bringing us together and making us more primitive is good because we get back into sort of like happy community. where we're not alienated from one another. But for Adorno and some of the critical theorists, it's bad because it makes us, quote, unconscious and infantile. I don't know. What do you think? Do you agree with that way of characterizing the difference between the two positions? And which position do you agree with more? I guess I'll put that question to the class. Whoa. Computer's moving all over the place today. So Julien, you agree with Adorno. Okay. Adorno has a point, but I disagree with his solution. Okay. Tell us about that. I think I see some grains of truth in both people's views. But yeah, with Adorno, yeah, television, I mean, when I was growing up, my parents would limit how much time I was allowed to watch television. Definitely. But I wasn't really huge into it in the first place. I did read a lot when I was growing up too. Yeah, what is Adorno's solution? I guess his solution, I assume, is what he presents in How to Watch Television, which I've not read, I'm afraid. Oh, okay. Listen to Schoenberg. It's funny. So listen to music and get psychoanalysis. Well, maybe those are just good things to do anyway, whether you watch a lot of television or not. I don't know. Yeah, so I think there's a grain of truth in what both thinkers are saying. Television can certainly make us unconscious and infantile. Yeah, that's a good point. A critical thinking course or two would be more useful in assessing the biases with media. Yeah. I mean, I don't understand the, sometimes people guffaw at fields like communications or media studies. I don't understand why. It seems to me that you ought to try and critique and understand the means of communication that you live your life dependent upon for information, for entertainment, for everything. Why would you not want to critically assess these things, try to understand how they work? I really do not understand the antagonism from some people in the hard sciences against things like this. And as Stefan points out, like, this would be a great opportunity for a critical thinking class. Like, imagine a critical thinking class on biases in the media that sort of did what we're doing here and took stuff from all of the different philosophical traditions: historical, ancient, continental, Anglo-American. I mean, yeah, I think that would be a cool course. You know what? Maybe I should pitch this. Maybe I could pitch this to the department. Maybe I could get this going. This is a good idea. Yeah, I gotta write this down. But that would be a cool class. And I think biased fact checking. Well, I mean, biased fact checking. What does that mean exactly? Like, I mean, there's always bias. Oh, like Instagram fact check bots. Yeah, I think fact checking has to be. Fact checking is really something that I think is best done by a human. But I guess depending on the kind of misinformation that we're dealing with, once it's identified, bots can help us kind of rein it in. But then there's this whole thing. Yeah, best done by multiple humans. Yeah, actually, that's better. That's better than what I said, Tess. Yeah, because what we want to do, I think, when we're fact checking things, we want to avoid the possibility of committing some kind of fallacy, like an appeal to authority or a genetic fallacy or something like that, right? When we're fact checking. This fact checkers are often accused of this, right? Like a fact checker will come on and say, I'm an expert in such and such a field, and I'm saying this is wrong. And they'll say, oh, this is just an appeal to authority or something. And it's like, well, no, but like expert opinion counts for something. Okay, so, but still, if you have multiple experts that agree, in science, we call this convergence. You know, we were talking about this before, the co-discovery of different things, like the theory of evolution or calculus. That's also a kind of convergence. So if experts can converge on a correct answer, that's a good thing. And then that kind of gets you out of that worry of just appealing to a single authority figure. But yeah, what is a fact when not all the info? Well, if you don't have all the information, then you simply do not have all the facts. And we can only check the facts that we you know, we can check whether statements are facts, I guess, is what we do when we fact check. We actually check whether the statement is a fact, whether it is a true proposition, right? So I don't know. I guess my point that I wanted to sort of make is that I think that television does both of these things, or can do both of these things. It certainly brings people together, or did, in the age of broadcast television. Now I think you know, maybe you get together, you have a streaming movie night with friends or a partner or with your family, right? Come over, stream a movie or binge watch a television show. You know, it's something that you kind of make a date out of, maybe, rather than doing it every day, depending on your living situation, right? So, but it can also make us, I suppose, a little bit more regressive, and whether that's a good or a bad thing, I don't know. Brings people together within groups against one another. Yeah, like polarization. Certainly, this is a divide that we see a lot of nowadays, between consumers of left-wing and right-wing media. You know, in the States, far more people are listening to Fox and Newsmax on the one hand and CNN on the other than are listening to the most neutral news broadcasters, you know, like NPR. So yeah, I don't know. It definitely polarizes people. But let's move on. Let's make sure we've got enough time. We've got about 20 minutes or so, I think. Sorry. Text message. What about the internet? The internet, Duzick writes, developed after McLuhan's time, but lends itself to analysis of the effect of communication media on experience and culture. Oh boy, does it ever. To continue, the internet is decentralized and contrasts with television in this respect. In addition, it includes print along with music and videos. The internet is interactive, while television is one-directional from a broadcasting center that depends on huge financing. Okay, yeah, that's a fair characterization of the internet. Is the internet positive or negative? Well, before I read this out, I'm just gonna get your thoughts, because when I first had the internet, you know, it had been around for a bit, but there was like slowly more internet. You know what I mean? Like when growing up with technology, for me, it was a different thing for you, like than likely many of your experiences were. You know, for example, we grew up. I didn't have a personal computer at home until I was in high school, right? I could use a computer, but it was at school typically. I didn't know how to use the internet until probably like grade 9. I just didn't really know how. Yeah, so my experience with the internet is probably a lot different than yours. The internet was also a lot more rudimentary back in the day, you know. I didn't have a high-speed internet connection until I went to college. The first time I had a high-speed internet connection. Before that, you'll never believe it. 26K modem. Not even 56K. The other one, the one below that, 26 or 24 or whatever it was. Yeah, man. Life was brutal back then. Dial-up internet. Had to walk uphill to school both ways through the snow. It was crazy. Anyway, nowadays, you know, you've got smartphones. People your age have grown up with stuff like this. I didn't have stuff like this till I was an adult, right? So I'm curious whether you think the internet is a good or a bad thing. I think that, again, it's complicated. Certainly, yes, the internet has made things more democratic, but one of the things that's made democratic is information itself, and that's not a good thing, right? Because that's how you end up with misinformation and conspiracy theories, which actually do drive political action. You know, without misinformation on the internet, you don't get a January 6th. You don't get a trucker convoy. You don't get these things without the internet. You know, it's crazy. So anyway, what does everybody think? I'll stop talking and let me know what you think of the internet. Let's open up the chat here. Oh, Max, go ahead.
What do I think about the internet? Well, I'm gonna start with one assumption, and that is the internet is not free. I mean that on two meanings. One is that it requires a certain level of connection to the internet or to electricity or to, you know, some kind of electronic power source, which could be reliant on, you know, location for one, or it could be relied on the speed of it, like the substantive, you know, access to it could be limited by whatever, a lack of money or something. Yeah. So that's the first point. But the second point of it not being free is that assuming, okay, everyone has internet access, the internet is like an open forum, right? But then there's also, you know, space in that forum that's infinite. But even though it's infinite, what can be, it's not actually infinite, but like, even though it's infinite, what can be observed is based upon, you know, I'll use the word how large it is, as in there's certain spheres of influence within the internet that control, you know, media, not in the sense that it has hard and fast rules all the times, but as in things within these spheres of influence in media, like print media online, you know, the Washington Post online and all those that own that. Or you have YouTube that's owned by a company. So within this public forum, there's privatization of who is submitting the media. So substantively, what is experienced by a person, especially on the mainstream, isn't really free unless you go out of your way to look for it. And even then, that's when people go into like conspiracy theory websites to like find the truth. So I wouldn't really call it free. That's my first initial thought, but
not to mention
for now.
Yeah, not to mention algorithmic stuff too, right? Like
Facebook's algorithms that, like, based off your likes and preferences, just how it develops like your political sphere and what you absorb. It'll
send you down a rabbit hole real fast. And I was thinking, I'm going to do an experiment this summer where I just start a brand new YouTube channel and start randomly clicking on things and see how long it takes me to go down one of those rabbit holes. I bet it will take an afternoon. So yeah, the algorithm stuff is worrisome. Yeah, not long at all for sure. 5 minutes. Yeah. Stefan says the internet's been a net good. Ultimately, it has contributed incredibly to worldwide communication and permitting for information to be spread more cheaply. Leela says it's made us more efficient in doing both bad and good, so it's made us both worse and better. I think I would agree with that. I mean, we're kind of back to asking fundamental questions like, what is technology? Is the internet a tool that we're in control of, or is it something that kind of controls us? Once we get on there and get into those algorithms, and those algorithms start directing us down different ways through the information superhighway, for better or worse. Maybe we're not yet equipped to handle the internet responsibly. I mean, the internet is still quite new. You know, it really, like the World Wide Web, the kind of internet that we have now is not that old. So, you know, we'll see how things go, maybe. But Duzik says here, excuse me, writers such as Dreyfus, remember Hubert Dreyfus, the critique of artificial intelligence guy, ingeniously using the categories of the aesthetic way of life from the Danish existentialist Kierkegaard, and in a more critical but less negative way, Borgman, have evaluated the internet as devaluing education with mindless surfing and alienating the individual by swamping her with an overload of meaningless information. Yeah. It sounds like, I mean, this is 1999, but it sounds like he's describing Facebook or Twitter or something like that. It sounds like not just the internet, but social media specifically. And I think that's something to be aware of, the difference between those two things. But yeah, it's certainly, when I read that passage, it's like, oh, that reminds me when I'm scrolling through my Twitter feed, like just information overload, everything sucks. Yeah. Duzik, I think, is a little bit more optimistic about the internet. He says, quote, "It also has the potential to increase democratization, even if to a lesser extent than claimed by its most utopian partisans." And 10, 20 years ago, sure, maybe I would have agreed with that. I remember first getting on the internet, like in high school, when I really started using the internet, I was actually like really blown away by it. I was like, wow, I can look up whatever I want, you know, and it really was information. Like I was like, I can learn so much. I was reading about all of my interests, a lot of stuff about music, you know, a lot of stuff about the mind. I would go and read websites on lunch at school. I would just go to the computer lab and just surf the web, you know, and it was so cool. The novelty of it. Yeah, back when Yahoo was the search engine. Yeah, Yahoo. I remember I used to use Dogpile. Everybody remember Dogpile? Used to use that all the time. So this is like pre-Google. Alta Vista, that's a good one. Ask Jeeves. I remember Ask Jeeves. Search engines before Google were interesting. So, but now, again, with social media and seeing, you know, so if you asked me back then when I was first using the internet, I would have agreed with, you know, people like Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov. You know, when you go and watch, I know I've said this before, but go and watch these guys talk about the internet before the internet was a thing, and how awesome it sounds. Like, oh, anyone will be able to learn anything. Knowledge will be free. It'll be democratic. It's going to be so crazy once the internet's a thing. It's going to be awesome. All the world's knowledge at your fingertips. And when I started using the internet, it really did feel that way. But now with Facebook and, you know, social media, misinformation, conspiracy theories propagating through like online message boards. Most recently, you know, it's QAnon stuff. I remember when I was first going to university, college university, it was all 9/11 conspiracy theories, right? And one that's really grown thanks to the internet, is the flat Earth movement. Like I said last time, there are more people who believe the Earth is flat now than there were like 2,000 years ago. It's crazy. Part of that is because there are a lot more people, but a lot of it is also because of misinformation. So I don't know. Are we optimistic about the internet? Are we pessimistic? And keep in mind, I realize we're using the internet right now, and this is a benefit of the internet. But I mean, you go on YouTube, and it's not like I'm complaining here, but like I upload these lectures on YouTube, they get like no views. A video of a guy, like some kind of fail video could get millions of views, right? So you see what I mean? All the information at your fingertips. Even like big YouTubers who do like science vlogging and stuff have to do it at the expense of also being kind of like entertaining. So yeah, it just needs some LEDs. So Thomas says, maybe I'm a bit of an optimist, but it seems like with careful curation by the user, it is still possible to use the internet as a wealth of knowledge. If you steer clear of social media, it seems like the internet can still be a force for good. I think that's a great point. Curating your own sort of internet usage, yes. And I think that's something you have to be, that's not easy to do, but I think it can be done. I think if I got myself a cooler background, yeah, maybe I'd get more views. But I'm not doing this for the views. I'm doing this to make sure people can learn something. To relate to modern events, I wonder if fewer people would care about the conflict in Ukraine were it not for on-demand nature of social media and showing events. Even so, the internet has provided some utility in helping democracy. Yeah, and I think I raised a similar idea the other day where, everyone has a camera. Everyone on the ground in Ukraine has a camera right now. And there are like kids on TikTok. I can't remember her name, but there's this teenager on TikTok, and she's blowing up on TikTok right now because she's showing what's going on, not just the damage to the city from the shelling, but like what life is like for people that are still there. So everyone has a camera, but of course, on the flip side of that, you also have things like, not just misinformation, but now we have deep fakes, right? Now we have deep fake technology. So it seems like every time every time we identify something good about the internet or social media, we can also identify something bad about the internet or social media. So I agree with this, though. I think that this is this could be what brings the conflict to an end. If this sort of content on social media documenting the reality of what's going on there can penetrate the Russian sort of propaganda sphere. Maybe. Because I don't think the Russian people want this conflict. I think the ones that know what's up don't want this. I think the Russians who support Putin are probably thoroughly already kind of in very deep with the propaganda on the news. So that is unfortunate. But yeah. Let's see, how are we doing for time? I think that we're just about at the end of the slides that I have. But if anyone has any other thoughts, please do offer them up. Oh, wait, no, I still have a couple more slides. What am I talking about? I always like either under or over prepare. I don't know what my deal is, but I always over or under prepare. I think today I might have over prepared. Yeah, okay. So let's try and finish. So recently there's been some criticism of technological determinism. This is from the section Cultural Determination of Technology. Dusek writes, to criticize technological determinism, authors have presented examples that are claimed to show that society has effects on the direction of or acceptance and rejection of technology. One way of doing this is to show that alternative directions for the development of technology were available and a socially influenced choice was made. Often this is difficult to do, since once a technology has been settled on, it acts as a constraint on further directions of development. The technology then appears, in retrospect, to be inevitable, and this supports belief in technological determinism. So there are some examples. I think we'll just go over these examples and then maybe end it. But this is different from the sort of Marxian cultural or technological determinism I mentioned earlier, where the changes in the base that outpace changes in the superstructure cause social upheaval. Max, go ahead.
Yeah, I was reading the part about the ancient Greek society and the ancient Roman society not being able to adapt machinery or enter like a huge era of technological development, despite the discovery of like steam being used for a long time.
Yeah.
And I can't make a judgment on this, but I've read alternative viewpoints that slave labor was not like the driving force between, the Romans or the Greeks and then that kind of industrial revolution rather. And the point that the person I read was making is that slaves were investments, slaves were actual useful, effectively tools within the household and within the workforce that require constant maintenance and care. You can't just be, throwing them out there as it's not like they're indispensable or they're not. It's not that they're disposable. Is that they're an integral part of the household. But when it comes to the machinery itself, like that wouldn't have even really replaced the slave labor because it wasn't fulfilling the same niche as one that would be operating the machinery, or one that would be, if there was a machine that pumped water, for example, using steam and was able to rotate a wheel because of that.
Yeah.
If that was a tool, like the slave could operate that, or someone who was an artisan or someone who was a skilled craftsman would also be able to operate that. So that's just a kind of a challenge to this Dusek view. But
yeah, fair enough.
The video I watched.
Yeah, if you want to do that, that would be good. So that's in contrast to adopt machinery was because of slave labor rather than wage labor. But as you say, slaves were not dispensable. I mean, yes, in Greece and Rome, it was chattel slavery. Like these people were literally owned. And we have to be careful because the accounts we have are mostly from the Greeks, right? Like, and they're not going to write accounts of treating slaves poorly. But we know that, for example, that you couldn't kill a slave. That was illegal in ancient Greece. If you read, this is in one of Plato's dialogues, actually, the Euthyphro, right? Euthyphro and Socrates have a conversation. They're on the steps of the palace. What's up, Euthyphro? Why are you here? Well, I'm bringing murder charges against my dad because he killed a slave, Compare that to, say, chattel slavery in the Americas. A lot more cruel. Both are bad, okay? Like, it's not, you can't own people. But in ancient Greece, I think the slaves were likely treated with a bit more dignity than, say, like enslaved Africans in the Americas were. So there may be something to that, Max. Like, it's not just like, we got all these slaves. So yeah. Anyway, what else? Oh, this one I like. Mechanical devices in monasteries. In the Dark Ages, it was a feudal society, so of course taxes were paid in crops, right? Oh, some stuff in the chat. Oh, yeah. The Romans were interesting because the Romans, I think you could very easily make an argument. First of all, a big reason why the Greeks probably never had an industrial revolution is because politically, the area was just not unified and not stable enough. They're always getting conquered. The Persians are trying to conquer you. Okay, you don't get conquered by the Persians, but then you go to a war. You have the Peloponnesian War, and then after that, you have the 30 Tyrants, and then you've got Alexander the Great, and then after that, you've got the Romans, right? And then after the Romans, you've got the Ottomans, right? And then after that, you've got all kinds of people always coming in and conquering you. And the Romans themselves, their views of science and of philosophy were very different from those of the Greeks. The Romans were all about engineering, right? They wanted knowledge so that they could solve a problem. Like, how do we get water from here to here? We need a guy who can build an aqueduct, right? How do we build an aqueduct? We need some stuff. We need some concrete. We need some tools. The Romans had heavy machinery, not like steam powered, but they had heavy machinery. So there may be different reasons why we didn't see an industrial revolution in Greece nor in Rome. There might be different reasons why we didn't see it in each case. But I'm not a historian, so I don't want to speculate too much. But yeah, everybody should check that video out that Max recommends. I'll watch it later myself. But in monasteries, there were fewer people in monasteries, but they still had to grow crops and pay taxes. Still had to grow crops so they could eat. There's no grocery stores. You grew your own food. So they needed devices to help save labor, plows and so forth. They needed devices to help keep time. Why? So they don't forget about their prayers and stuff, right? Because they're monks. You got to pray. You got to go and pray at certain times of the day, right? So they developed clocks and chronometers for this reason. So here in both of these, if the Greek and Roman example is true, and if the mechanical devices from monasteries example is a good example, then in both cases we have culture influencing technology. In the first case, the failure to adopt mechanical technology, steam engine, steam power, and in the second, the culture sort of spurring on the adoption of certain tools and mechanisms that make life easier. Similarly, in the 20th century, we had these numerically controlled lathes. The conventional thinking is that these numerically controlled lathes became better than a previous version of a lathe. A lathe when you've got your wood and you're turning it and making a nice thing. Maybe you make a leg for a table or something on a lathe. Something that a carpenter works with. They had these record playback lathes that would record the movements of like a skilled carpenter on a sort of tape, and it could be rewound and played back to drive the lathe, and we could make better tapes, and the idea was that numerically controlled lathes became better and eventually replaced these playback lathes. But Noble thinks that what really happened is numerical lathes were never really any better or worse. They just allowed control of production to be put in the hands of engineers and designers rather than the carpenters. So on the record playback lathe, it's the carpenter that's sort of coming up with the design of the table leg or the chess piece or whatever he's lathing, right? But if you have a numerical lathe, a computer lathe, then it's some kind of designer. He just designs it all in AutoCAD or whatever and programs it in, and that's it. The carpenter just stands there and makes sure the lathe does its job. So yeah. Again, culture. In this case, I would say corporate capitalistic culture forcing the adoption of a certain kind of technology. It's about time to wrap up, so I think we'll stop there. We'll finish the next couple of slides next time on Tuesday. Let's see. We only have a few more to go, really. And then after that, we'll discuss the next chapter, autonomous technology. It got the most votes, and it's not that long. I think it's only about 10 pages or so, which is nice. So next time we'll finish up this and we'll discuss autonomous technology. Somebody in the chat. Yes, there's still one more reading response, but I am going to push it back because I adjusted the other due dates as well. So stay tuned for that. What was I going to say? It was something else. It was important. It's gone now. Oh, yeah. We'll cover autonomous technology. Then I think we'll keep going in chronological order. So the most popular chapters were autonomous technology, then anti-technology, then women, feminism, and technology. But we'll probably do autonomous technology first, then women, feminism, and technology, and then anti-technology last, just because that's the order they appear in the book. But yeah, that's what we'll do next time. Finish this, autonomous technology, and then we'll move on to talk about women, feminism, and technology, which should be pretty fun. So have a good weekend, everyone. The weather is really warming up and becoming lovely, so everybody should go and enjoy that. And check out the video that Max shared. Hey, maybe that would be maybe some of you will get some good thoughts going for your final critical response by watching this video and considering the arguments. So thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend, and I'll see you all next time. Thanks, guys. Take care. End transmission.